CrossFit shoulder injuries and what we can learn from this latest research paper. A new study has tracked CrossFit athletes for 12 months across experience level, and the shoulder findings should make every CrossFitter pay attention, whether you're just starting out or you've been doing it for years. So here's what they did. 102 CrossFit athletes recruited from 10 boxes in Brazil. They split them into 3 groups: beginners, scale, and RX. And that was based on what they could actually do in training, not self-reported, confirmed by their coach. They assessed injuries at 3 time points, and it's worth noting at this point that recruitment for the study was based on whether people were injured at the baseline point. They then looked at them 6 months on and after 12 months. They did a good job of defining injury properly. It's not just about a niggling discomfort, which I think every CrossFitter has got at periodic points in their year, but it was something which had made them see a healthcare professional and stop or reduce training. And that is an important distinction. They tracked the site of the injury, which category the athlete was in and how often they were training. Then they followed what happened over time. Now there are some methodological issues with this paper, and I'm going to cover those at the end. Well, let's see what they found. Across all 3 groups, the beginner, scale, and RX, the shoulder was consistently one of the most injured joints, and it stayed that way across the 3 time points for the full 12 months. And it is worth sitting with that for a moment, because most people might assume that as you get fitter, more experienced, or better at the movements, that the injury risk is going to drop. And for overall injuries, that is partially true. The RX athletes did have the lowest total injury incidence. But the shoulder, well, the shoulder stays in the picture at every level. Let's work through each of the groups. If you're a real beginner in CrossFit and you don't have a particularly athletic training background, the risk comes because people are being exposed to a lot of new movements and volumes at intensities that they haven't experienced before. They're learning new, sometimes complex movements, and they probably don't have the motor control to be able to support those patterns yet, because those things just take time to develop. Now, if you wanted to upset a shoulder, this would be a pretty good way to do it. So it makes sense that we are seeing a high incidence of shoulder injuries in beginners. Now let's look at the scale group. In my opinion, these are arguably the most vulnerable. They are just competent enough to access the most demanding movements, but not yet conditioned enough to handle them consistently. And this is exactly where I found myself when I started CrossFit a few years ago. I could Olympic lift to a good standard, I was pretty decent at calisthenics, and I knew how to push myself on the fitness. Those things made me a liability to myself because I could participate at a level that I wasn't really ready for. Just because I could do everything didn't mean that I could do everything at the same time and back to back. And the main challenge I see for these scale athletes though is they are spending more and more time on the rig, learning and performing highly dynamic movements. Kipping pull-ups, maybe playing around with some butterflies, toes to bars, handstand progressions, having a go at muscle-ups. Suddenly that shoulder is being loaded far more aggressively than it is often conditioned for. Now in the RX group, shoulder injuries consistently represented the highest proportion of all injuries throughout the study. These athletes are doing everything: full intensity, full complexity, high volume, week after week. That shoulder is exposed because of the cumulative demand is just relentless. Now, if you know my stance on physical preparation and reconditioning, I will never say that something you want to do is bad for the shoulder. I'll just make the point that injuries often occur when the shoulder is not appropriately prepared for the demands that you want to place upon it. And in the case of CrossFit, those demands are significant. There is also no hiding. Every day is shoulder day at the CrossFit box. Now let's cover off the limitations because there are some significant ones. First, the researchers only recruited athletes who already had an injury. So this doesn't tell us how likely any CrossFitter is to get a specific injury. And this is actually the bit that bothers me the most. We don't really know if the people who had shoulder injuries at the start are the same ones that are still reporting them 12 months on. The injuries numbers look like they improve over time, but the most injured athletes might have already dropped out. We also don't know if the injury that the people had at the start was the same injury that they had at the end. So we are missing a significant amount of clarity in this paper. Second, we've got 102 athletes, all from Brazilian boxers. We don't know anything about training culture, programming, coaching, and all of those things matter and could potentially impact the results. And then thirdly, the study relied on self-reported questionnaires around injury. There was no physical assessment, so when it says that they had a shoulder injury, that could be anything from a rotator cuff-related shoulder pain to a shoulder instability problem. And those are quite different problems that would require different solutions. So let's say that we can read this as a pattern, but not a verdict, and it's definitely not a precise injury audit. What we can take from it is that, once again, in a research paper investigating injuries in CrossFit, the shoulder ranks as one of the most likely sites of injury. So the question we have to ask is, what is being done about it? The pattern that it shows is real, and it's reinforced across multiple papers, and it matches what I see clinically all the time. The shoulder is one joint that stays at risk no matter how good you get at CrossFit, and the reason probably changes at every level, but I will dare say that exposure is likely a consistent contributor. So if your shoulder is talking to you a little bit after those sessions, you definitely need to pay attention to that. Don't ignore it, because small niggles can often manifest into bigger issues if you just try and work around it. If you want to get started on understanding how to take the next best step to get your shoulder to a better place so that you can lift and compete without pain and with confidence, then you can take our 2-minute assessment. It is free, and it will tell you what you need to do next.